I spoke in the last message about end times and many false Christs, many false prophets will come and perform great miracles and wonders and signs and deceive many, even if it were possible, the very elect. And it talks about science and everything increasing. So we're talking about end times, and as deception will intensify. And really, we're focusing on just bringing to surface ideas and scriptures in ways to identify, to discern, and to expose falsehood and how to embrace the truth. And so I talked about the last message about our base being removed, and if you haven't seen that message, you might want to see that one before you watch this one, but go ahead and watch this one. And so I want to just talk a little bit about one specific things in this message, and then we're going to go into what's happening in the world and some of the things and how what does the scripture say about them and how to bring them to surface. And so I want to talk about words. Words are the shell or the cover or the face of our communication. For an example, I can say love. That word is just a cover of something, an idea, a substance, a teaching that it brings to surface or exposes. It's the doorway to bring out the idea of love. I love you. Means nothing if it's just words. The words are the doorway or the surface of communication. So we use words. If you don't have words, we cannot open the doorway to bring ideas out. And so they're what we use to communicate, but it's always they're loaded. And that's something I want to talk about today. In Ephesians 4:14 it says, so that we may no longer be children. And so children, they don't detect words as much, tossed to and fro by the waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine. And wind it's like the atmosphere or what blows around, and there's doctrine, ideas that float around. It says by human cunning, by craftiness in deceitful schemes. And so these things are ideas that are floating around. So we're not supposed to be blown about embracing this and jumping from this to that and everything. We're supposed to find the truth and cling to it. The Bible uses words to bring to the surface topics. But those words have a doctrine behind that. I'm not saying every word, but key words. And that's what we're talking about, key words. Not just any word, but key words that we use. And so key words, they have a doctrine. For example, justification. It has a doctrine. It says that we are justified by the blood of Christ. We're justified by the truth of Christ. Or sanctification, we're sanctified by the blood of Christ. And so there's a teaching, there's a setup or a doctrine, as the word uses, behind the word sanctification or justification or redemption. And so we're redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. We're redeemed by the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. And so there's always a large teaching or a teaching behind the word. And so if I just use the word justification or just use the word sanctification, I open the door. I bring that idea to the surface. That's something that happens in the scriptures, but that also happens in life. And so words that we use in life are very, very important. Matthew 4:4 says, but he answered, as it is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. And so not just God doesn't just give us the word, but that word is loaded to feed us. It brings something to us. And so when God says something, we know it's loaded. There's one thing that I think we often don't think about as people, but it is a reality. We often use a word in relation to certain happenings, make then the word popular or common through those happenings. And as we do that, the process of it, we establish a definition of that word. In other words, this happens, we use a word to expose or talk about a certain happening, but that's that happening that has caused us to use this word. So when we use the word, we think about that happening. And so that word is used as the base or as a door to bring this idea or this happening to the surface. And so there's an activity, there's an establishment, there's an organization, there's a philosophy, there's a cause behind or attached to that word. And so we use that word. For an example, the word church. Every person that's ever been connected to the church, has been part of a church, has an idea when I use the word church. The church opens not just, okay, now we have the word church, good, we have that. Now there's a thinking behind it. And so we use the word church, and so when we communicate, when I use the word church with you, you probably have a different thinking about church as I do. And so because different connection, different things you've seen, different things you've been part of, maybe it's not extremely different, but maybe it's a little bit different that you think about the word church than I would think about the word church. And so there's an activity, there's an organization, there's a philosophy, there's a cause, there's a doctrine or a teaching attached to that word. And so we use that word church. And so often when we talk about church, we talk about different things. And so now when you use the word church, I just don't want you to just use it. I want to know, what do you believe about it? What's your definition of the word church? The word democracy. We have ideas of what that means based on what we have seen, experienced, etc. Democracy. It's a popular word, used a lot these days. You see it on the news, you see it everywhere. The word is being used, that democracy is in danger. With the war going on, we've talked, there's been a lot of talk about democracy, and this is, democracy is in danger, democracy could be defeated and stuff like that. And so what's your definition of democracy? I'm not a democratic. I'm not one that embraces democracy. I'll be right open about it. I don't think democracy is the answer of life. Democracy, I believe, is the doorway to the new age life. Democracy brings us down the path, and democracy has been used greatly, greatly, greatly for evil, and some people would be very angry at me for saying that, but the truth is, and if you don't believe me now, wait 20 years, and then you will believe me. And so, but democracy, we have definitions, and so the word church, the word democracy, and we can use a lot of words. What about politics or politician? We almost are used to the fact that we say we have politicians that look after those things. The word politics or politician means one that wiggles his way into position to rule over others or to be in control, and so, or to be in position. And so that's really a short, kind of wrapped up definition. There's other definitions, But that's one of the definitions. That's what politics means, or politician means, one that wiggles his way, that will manipulate, that will change, that will step on things in order to get into position to rule over others or to be in charge of things. And so I always say politics has no place in government. We're supposed to have governors are supposed to be in government, not politicians. And so politics, it doesn't belong in government. But we use the word and we're used to the word, and when we think of a politician, sometimes say, oh, maybe there is a good one yet. Really, no. The word doesn't even allow there to be really a good politician. Now, someone has to sometimes take a place, put himself in a place, or to deal with things. In other words, there's positions, but God has established positions. And so if I create a position and I wiggle my way in there, I'm wrong. And if I wiggle my way into God's position, I'm wrong also. But sometimes someone needs to take charge. And so it's not like everyone should just back off and say no one should ever maneuver to get into place. The intent is very important. And so, but politics simply means to maneuver or wiggle one way, or to take advantage or do whatever, to step on people, whatever it takes to be in position to rule over others. That is really, and so that doesn't belong in government. Government, people are supposed to be appointed and anointed and called to that. Now, there's no place for politics in the church. But we see a lot of politics where people wiggle their way into position. Sometimes not an official position, but being in a place where they have some control over the church or some control over what is happening. A lot of that, a lot of politics in the church. Doesn't belong there. Should be God-called people, God-appointed, and people should be there because God wants them. They say, well, we can't trust God. We can. We can trust God, that God will appoint it. I read Psalm 75, that God takes down one and puts up another. God does that. God looks after those things. But what is the definition of politics? In other words, and I don't want to get deeper into that, but we use a word, and sometimes there's something behind it, and what's behind it is sometimes not really what the word means. And so what we do is we develop an idea of, and we use the word to expose that idea. And so there are, here is what we often miss. People, groups, churches, organizations, governments, etc. change the cause, the activity, the philosophy, the plan in connection to the word. And so they changed something very different, but still use the same word. And so I just mentioned a couple of words, but I want us to think more in a larger way. But I just want us to get the idea is that we have to be careful when we use words or when others use words on us, to try to get us to believe something, to try to get us to support something, to try to get us on board with something. That is one we got to be careful about words, because there's so many times words are used and people know, sometimes manipulators know what we believe that word means or how we use it, and they use it against us. And so this is what we have to be careful about deception, that we don't allow someone to just simply use a word and we jump on board and we don't even studied or examined their thinking behind the word. For an example, they say, we are fighting for the church. When someone says we're fighting for the church, what does that mean? What's your definition of church? What are you fighting for? So they can use the word church, and you can use it in a vast range of ways. What's your definition? What's the activity? What's the doctrine behind the word that you use? Show me that. Show me what you're fighting for, not just a word using, saying that I'm fighting, no, support me. There's a lot of people that say, I'm fighting for the church, I'm fighting for this, I'm fighting for this ministry, or I'm fighting for this work, or I'm fighting for this philosophy, or I'm fighting for this. But what do you mean by that? And that's where we can get we get tricked, and we send money, we send support and everything, and we don't find out what's behind the word. We're fighting for democracy. We're fighting for freedom. I tell you, many that claim that they're fighting for democracy are actually on the other side trying to destroy democracy. So we have to, what exactly do you believe democracy is, or what are you fighting for, or what do you want people to support? So we don't just jump on board when someone says they fight for democracy. And like I said, I'm not really a supporter of democracy anyway. I think that we all must focus on God being in charge, and God leading, and everything that is human government, human control, has to support that idea. And so democracy is really based on majority rules, majority calls the shots, we vote, and so it really supposed to put the people in charge, not God in charge. And really what it does is that leads to humanism, it leads to communism, it leads to New Age, it leads to really where humanity opposes God. And there's a lot of things behind there. And so, but even when they say we're fighting for democracy, and now we're fighting this system with this system, and really, are we supposed to fight for that? Are we supposed to support that? But really the word is being used to mislead us many times, and we can support ideas and thinking that are not really what they are. Freedom, what does freedom mean? Freedom, and I'm going to talk in the next messages a little bit more about freedom. And so really, what's behind the word? That's just what I wanted to focus on. And so for an example, let me give you a couple of examples, and then we're going to wrap this up because we want to continue in the next message where we want to look at specifically people in charge. What are we facing these days? What does the Bible say about some end times, and what kind of people will take place, take positions, be placed in positions? What are the dangers that we're facing as we're heading towards the end time? But let me give you a couple of examples before we wrap this up, so to just kind of get the idea a little bit more. For an example, I go on a trip, on a personal trip. I love fishing, and I go on a fishing trip. But I do it on business time. And I do it with business money. Because what I do is I set it up, I can go on this fishing trip and I can have that one meeting. And so now I call it a business trip. Don't call it a fishing trip, don't call it a personal trip, I call it a business trip. And so I do this 1 year. I go on this personal trip. Really, I don't have to go on it, but I can do it, and I call it, and I say to Natalia, I said, I'm going on a business trip. And she knows it's not really a business trip. And so someone calls the home, and they says, where's Jacob? Oh, he's on a business trip. And the next year I do it again. And someone calls again, where's Jacob? Oh, he's on a business trip. And all of a sudden, this idea that I'm on a business trip becomes, we call, oh, when are you going on your business trip again? And so we start using a business trip because the truth didn't totally fit us. And so we use it and we call it a business trip. And so all of a sudden, oh, that person also went on a business trip. And so sometimes that's how things develop when we use words to deceive, to manipulate. And so it's not a business trip, it's a personal trip. But we start calling it a business trip, all of a sudden it's being natural. Oh, where is he? Oh, he's on a business trip. And the idea becomes common or natural. And so that's how politics got into government. That's how politics got into church. And we became used to it. Even at the first, we knew this is not right, but we didn't really deal with it. And it became used to it. Now we just call it. And so not even knowing what's behind it. And so we call it a business trip, and all of a sudden it's just, the fishing trip is called a business trip, and we don't even think about it anymore. Another example. I tell Natalia that I love her. Those words mean nothing if there's not actions behind it. For example, to prove that love, I bring her flowers. I take her out for dinner. I buy her some nice clothes. I provide a place for her. I protect her against danger. And all those actions tell her, confirm with her that when I tell her I love you, that is sure. That brings value to the idea. Now all of a sudden, I change those actions, but still use the same phrase, I love you. Now all of a sudden I have actions even of I'm unfaithful to her, but I'm still saying, I love you. And all of a sudden, those words, the activity behind the words changes, but I still use the same word, I love you. That's what we sometimes do. I love you, but what's behind the idea? And so we have to be careful about words, because words can trick us. We have to examine when there's organizations, when there's governments, when there's people, when there's things that people want us to support or embrace or believe. When we don't look behind the word that they use, we are going to be deceived, and they're going to use the word to deceive us, to trick us. Now, also, we have to be careful that we don't do that with others. This is what happened to Israel. Genesis chapter 34, they deceived the Hivites. Joshua chapter number 9, the Hivites deceived them. The trick that they used on the Hivites came back to trick them. And so I always say the key of not being deceived is don't deceive others. If we live within truth, speak the truth to ourselves, like Psalm 15 talks about, and don't deceive others, examine things. Don't just believe because someone uses a word. Get behind the idea. What's the teaching? What does that church mean by the word saved? What does that group mean by the word Christian? What do they mean by the word church? What do they mean by this? What do they mean by this doctrine? I remember one time I was speaking to a person about salvation. And I said, salvation is by grace, not by works. And he totally agreed. He says, I believe that it is by grace. And then I all of a sudden, as we were talking, I discovered that his definition of grace was very different than what I had studied from the scriptures, what grace meant. He believed that grace was giving us the ability to work for our salvation, so that it was still by works, but that grace was giving me the ability to do enough good works so that God would accept me. And so he says, yes, it's by grace. But he said, no, grace is not to enable us. Grace does enable us to serve, but grace is not given me so that I can save myself. God saves me by grace. God saves us by grace. And so the different definition. And so we have to be careful about words. And now in the next message, I want to get into authorities and some things to watch for. And so God bless you. I think we have a bit of a foundation, some things to watch for. We're going to continue in the next message. God bless you.